Hello, BookTube. All right, today we're trying something different for our weekend read-alongs. We're doing something, the usual, as well. But the usual on my channel for read-alongs has been to read a book that is in the public domain. A classic, or a neglected classic. Something that doesn't cost you any money. That if you have to, if you're lacking bookstores, you can download it for free from any number of different sites online. That has been true for most of what we've read on this channel so far. And this month, for July, I wanted to try something a little different and see if it works. So I picked a book that I just recently got, a wonderful trade paperback edition from Book Depository, Lonesome Dove by Larry McCrae. His Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Big, enormous thing. That's been on a lot of people's TBRs and shelves, staring down at them, but without being cracked open. The reason I picked it, it's an experiment. I don't want to put you out for this channel, but the reason that I picked it is because Lonesome Dove has had an enormous print history. The hardcover was everywhere. The mass market paperback, the little yellow mass market paperback, was everywhere. It had a larger print run than the hardcover. And there have been innumerable trade editions since then. So I figured if there's any book that is still copyright that you can get fairly easily, it'll be this one. In fact, I checked a whole bunch of used book selling sites online, and it was available for dirt cheap in all of them. So, and your library will have it, your used bookstore will have it. So I thought we'd give it a try, and we'll see if it works. And Lonesome Dove is a historical novel. Larry McCrae he writes about the American West, but he writes about all sorts of things. He became famous for a contemporary novel, and then Lonesome Dove struck, and it was everywhere. Everybody talked about it. And that was before it was adapted for one of the greatest adaptations of a literary work that I've ever seen, a TV miniseries starring Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall that was just incredible. I don't know if it's on Netflix, but if you haven't seen it, you're going to love it. So I highly recommend that. But that helped with the acclaim of this book. That's what's kept it in print all this time. And people who read the book originally and loved it, I read it and loved it when it first came out, and then I dreaded the miniseries, and I watched the miniseries. The miniseries is done with an incredible amount of fidelity and also love and tremendous acting chops, just all around. So the people who are in that position are probably dreading. I am dreading the year that comes where some rumor comes that Hollywood is going to do a 3-hour movie of this, with Wes Anderson directing or something like that. That's just going to be awful. I could be wrong about that, I'm hoping, but in the meantime, I thought we'd do a read-along of Lonesome Dove because I just got this trade paperback and I wanted to put it through its paces. So Lonesome Dove is about 600 pages long. So I thought we would do, what is this? It's about 800 pages long. Yeah, it's about 800 pages long. So I thought we would do about 200 pages a week for July. So the first 200 pages, roughly speaking, the first 200 pages gets us to the end of part 1 of the book. The chapters don't really help with Lonesome Dove, but roughly speaking, I mean, you can read a little bit ahead. We're going to have to make up that tailwind somewhere along the way, but roughly 200 pages. And for this first installment of the book, we're not going to worry too much about great details about exactly when the reading segment starts and stops. So the first 200 pages in this installment will be just telling you, we'll be discussing the setup of the book. The book takes place in 1880, coincidentally enough. That is kind of somewhat of a mind-boggling coincidence because the novel Lonesome Dove is set in 1880, and our other read-along for the month of July, The Duke's Children by Anthony Trollope, was published in 1880 and is effectively set then. And that realization, the realization that the world of Plantagenet Palliser, and the Pallisers just in general, was also at the same time the world of the Hat River Cattle Company that we meet in the opening 200 pages of this book, is eye-opening. And it's meant to be, I mean it to be in bringing that point, because one of the things to realize about this novel, one of the things to realize about why Larry McCrae said it when he did, is that this is the end of an era. Very much so. And when we move our attention to the town of Lonesome Dove on the Rio Grande, on the border with Mexico, a tiny little dust speck with one church, one saloon, one whore, hardly any people, hardly any business. The Hat River Cattle Company is not doing booming business. When we move there, we move to a world about as far away from the Mayfair of Plantagenet Palliser as you could get. And yet it's the same year. And the reason for that is because the world that these people inhabit is coming to an end. They already sense it. Our two main characters, our two retired Texas Rangers, Woodrow Call and Augustus McCrae, they have bought this dirt, this burnt earth dirt patch ranch in Lonesome Dove. Once they got out of rangering, once they retired from rangering, once they considered that there was no more work for rangers, or were told that, they had originally been commissioned to clear out the Comanche, and then they were commissioned to clear out Mexican bandits who plagued the border. And now there's hardly any of either of those left, and they have to do something. So they take to ranching, and they have a small cast of characters around them. There's Dietz, a black man who has been their companion for many, many years. There's a sort of droopy-faced imbecile named P.I., who was also a ranger and has been with them forever and ever. There's a scandalous old cook named Bolivar, who's not really part of their crew and doesn't seem to like them much. But has a place to go that is away from his nagging wife. And there's also a young boy, Newt. Newt Dobbs is his name, but no one, as the narrative tells us, no one remembers a Mr. Dobbs. And in town, there's also a cast of characters. In the town of Lonesome Dove, there's a barkeeper, there's a weird, eccentric character named Lippy, and there's also Lorena, who is the town whore. A beautiful, intelligent, sensitive young woman who we see exchanging verbal sparring with Augustus McCrae, and also taking his money for services rendered. And this is a very unsentimental look at the Old West. The standard, heart crane stereotype of the American West is the whore with the heart of gold. And Lorena might have a heart of gold, but there are no gentlemen here. She is a businesswoman as well. And we get a look at the camp and what it's like. And the main lens through which we see it is the dynamic of friendship between Call and McCrae. They are completely different people. Completely different. And they bicker like an old married couple, but they are partnered. Not in a romantic sense, but they are best friends. They are part of each other. They cannot conceive of walking away from each other. They're partners. And there's one point in these early chapters where Augustus McCrae actually points it out, where he says that Call is constantly on. He's constantly bothered about things, and that means that McCrae is bothered all the less, because he knows that Call will be bothered on behalf of both of them. When Call thinks about it, he thinks he worried about that possibility most of the way home. Not that Gus wasn't competent. So far as sheer ability went, Gus was as competent as any man he'd ever known. There had been plenty of times when he'd wondered if he himself could match Gus, if Gus really tried. It was a question that never got tested because Gus seldom tried. As a team, the two of them were perfectly balanced. He did more than he needed to, while Gus did less. And that's a point that is hit very lightly in these early 200 pages, but it will come back in massive ways later in the book. And that point is that Call, he's very stern, he's not humorous at all, he's very forbidding, he's very formidable. And the point that McMurtry wants to make in the rest of the book, it isn't hit too strong in these first 200 pages, is that McCrae, in his way, McCrae never stops talking, he never stops laughing and joking, but he's every bit as much a retired Titan as Call is. He's a totally different, in other words, caliber of person from anyone else around him. The boy doesn't matter, but Dietz is a very good scout, a supernaturally able scout, but he's not the same kind of old retired legend as Colin McCrae. P certainly is not, and neither is the main character that we get introduced to, The basic plot of the beginning of Lonesome Dove is the basic plot of so many westerns, which is a stranger comes to town. Only in this case, the stranger is well known to Colin McCrae. He's a former Texas Ranger, Jake Spoon, who comes from their time period, but is not cut from the same cloth as them at all. He is a loser. Colin McCrae, both at various points in these 200 pages, in various ways, say that they just expect that he will come to no good. They expect that he'll end his life at the end of a hangman's noose, which is a bit of foreshadowing. There's a bit of foreshadowing that I noticed a lot in these first 200 pages. For instance, Call has a massively powerful mare that no one else can touch. He is trying to break that mare for use. He's impressed by her skill. And at one point, he's not looking. She takes a chunk out of him, bites a chunk out of his back. And it's an ugly wound that Call will not really allow McCrae to treat. And at one point in these early pages, McCrae says, well, you know, if you don't allow me to treat that, you're likely to die of gangrene. And anybody who's read the whole of this book is going to wince a little when they see that line. It's going to be hundreds of pages before you remember it, and it's going to hurt when you do. But things are moseying along at Hat River and at Lonesome Dove. It's boiling hot, and it never rains, and there are no prospects, and there's barely any business. And life there consists of trying to re-roof a barn. A freak gust of wind blew the roof off, but there's no wood, so what do? Or digging wells and hitting stone. And just, it's hot, unforgiving work in a filthy environment. Very much a step down, very much gone to seed for these two characters who were, as we're going to be told, people wanted to make us senators. It can be beautiful. And Lonesome Dove doesn't last long. It doesn't go many pages without Larry McMurtry flexing the muscles that make him, in my opinion, one of the greatest novelists of the second half of the 20th century. Whether he's writing contemporary Western or historical Western. He makes missteps, yes, but he is really, really talented. Not only at personality stuff, but even at description. I noticed a description that I wanted to read to you. Augustus McCrae hardly ever sleeps, and has made a habit of going out before dawn to prepare biscuits for the crew. He likes to go out and sit in the dark and watch the sun come up over the dry riverbed and over Lonesome Dove. And McMurtry describes it, and it's really neat. The eastern sky was red as coals in a forge, lighting up the flats along the river. Dew had wet the million needles of the chaparral, and when the rim of the sun edged over the horizon, the chaparral seemed to be spotted with diamonds. A bush in the backyard was filled with little rainbows as the sun touched the dew. It was tribute enough to sunup that it could make even chaparral bushes look beautiful, Augustus thought, and he watched the process happily, knowing it would only last a few minutes. The sun spread reddish-gold light through the shining bushes, among which a few goats wandered, bleating. Even when the sun rose above the low bluffs to the south, a layer of light lingered for a bit at the level of the chaparral, as if independent of its source. Then the sun lifted clear, like an immense coin. The dew quickly died, and the light filled the bushes like red dust dispersed, leaving clear, slightly bluish air. It's picturesque, but nevertheless, our characters have hit a dead end. They know it, and Call knows it especially, and has been thinking for quite some time, but somehow breaking out of this rut. And it turns out that Jake Spoon arrives, the ne'er-do-well playboy, Jake Spoon arrives with the means to move things along. He is the event that breaks the logjam. He comes to Lonesome Dove and to the ranch with stories of Montana and the beautiful country way, way up north. Beautiful range for grazing cattle, where enterprising men can make themselves rich. And Call decides, based on that and his desire to have another challenge to conquer. The Comanche are gone. The bandits are mostly gone. He decides he needs another challenge, and that's what it will be. They will conduct a quick raid into Mexico to raise a herd of cattle, and they will march that cattle north from the Rio Grande to Montana. They'll assemble a crew of cowboys and do that. And that is the decision that animates the beginning chapter. What we're reading today, the first 200 pages, is a look at Lonesome Dove, an introduction to these characters, and the decision to move, the decision to change their lives. A classic gimmick in American fiction, where people decide to light out for the territories. They decide to take to sea when it's a dark, drizzly November in their soul. Where, in other words, the main motivation for the main action of the book is a little bit on the weak side. It's a little bit on the whimsical side. Call doesn't know that he'll make money or even make it to Montana. He doesn't know that. He just knows that he wants to go. And McCrae, of course, will go with him. And the cowboys will do whatever the captain says. So that is the beginning of the book. We meet all of these characters, we learn the rhythm of their lives, and also we get to know Larry McMurtry's style in this book, which is far more generous, far more Homeric than in any of the fiction that he had written before this. This is, every character has a story, and the stories are wonderfully told. You wouldn't want to do without any of them. Or at least I would. Reading this again for this read-along, I was in love all over again with this book and the narrative spell that it casts. I don't think that Larry McMurtry equals the job in this book, but once or twice in the rest of his career, which is winding down. I hate to say it, but I don't think he has another great book inside him. I could be wrong about that. I have been in the past. But that is what we're doing for today, is those introductory chapters. And I would love to know, this book, much like Dune, which is another read-along we're doing in July, has probably been staring down from the shelf at a lot of you. If you're starting it for this read-along, what'd you make of this first 200 pages? What'd you think of part 1? Did it keep you reading? Did it make you laugh? And was that unexpected? And what do you do with the lack of sentimentality? That's another question, because we don't live... 2019 is not a particularly sentimental age, but it is eventually virtue-signaling age. Larry McMurtry, I don't think, could got this book published in 2019. Mainly because some of his characters, including his two main characters, have engaged in what now critics would call ethnic cleansing, and they wouldn't give the book or its literary merits the time of day. Not to mention the treatment of Lorena. What did you make of that? Was it hard? Did it grate against, if you're young especially, and you've had your reading sensibilities created by the 21st century, did that grate against you? That sort of thing. I would love to know all about that. I want to know your reactions to the beginning of this book, including the answer to the most important question of all. When you got to the end of part 1, were you eager to move on? Were you eager to keep reading? So that's Lonesome Dove for this week. Now, next week we're going to move on, just do the next roughly 200 pages. Where will that bring us? Where does this... Again, I'm only talking about my edition here. What's a good break? Okay, chapter 53. Looks like. In my edition, it's at 413. That's close enough. This chapter 53 starts long before the whiskey boat stopped. Elmira knew she was going to have trouble with Big's Way. So that is... Let's go to chapter 53. I'll turn down the page. Let's go to chapter 53 for next time, for next week. And in the meantime, tell me all. Tell me everything about what you're feeling about Lonesome Dove. And I will wrap this up for now, but we have other stuff to talk about, so I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.